Hey, Jared here from soundguitarlessons.com. Today I have a fun, simple, useful, easy lesson for us about what are drop voicings for guitarists. Now, drop voicings and drop chords make all kinds of sense if you're looking at a piano keyboard and you get it explained that way. But as guitarists, it is really confusing, and I've had my share of having to kind of scratch my head about this and look it up a bunch of times and figure out, wait, is this chord a drop chord, drop 2 chord, drop 3 chord? What do these mean? Why are they labeled that way? Well, as guitarists, it's just not as obvious to us, so it's confusing, but it's good to know because so many people use these terms, and it's nice to have the labels, the correct labels, and they're quick to explain the voicings. So if we can make sense of what they are on the fretboard, this can be a big win for us. So I'm going to just show in a fretboard way how we can make sense of what a drop 2 voicing is and why it's called that, and then what a drop 3 voicing is and why it's called that, and an awesome trick for what you can do anytime you have a guitar chord shape, specifically a 7th chord. That's when drop voicings, drop 2, drop 3, that's when they are used, when we're using 7th chords. If you have any 7th chord shape, I have a little trick you can use to figure out if it's a drop voicing and what kind it is. So I think that's going to be really helpful. Let's dive right in and not waste any time. We are going to start with this voicing that is a C major 7 chord in close position. So this is the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the major 7. So this is just like if you stack up in thirds on a piano keyboard, and that's kind of how we can do it on the guitar. Now, a drop 2 voicing means that we take the 2nd note from the top. So if you start counting from the highest note and you count 1, even though this is the root down here, we're just counting for the sake of how do we find this note that is 2 that we're supposed to drop? Well, this is the highest note. This is the 2nd from the highest note. That's the note we are dropping. So drop 2 means we're dropping the 2nd from the highest note. Drop 3 will mean we're going to drop this 3rd from the highest note. So just for the sake of these drop voicings, think of that counting down from the highest note. It's not that we're calling those chord tones any particular number. You're just saying, okay, 1, 2, drop 2, okay, dropping it down an octave. So this is another thing on the guitar. We want to be able to see our octave shapes and move notes around easily, instantly, swiftly. We need this to be just obvious to us. I have 2 really great videos about this, and I will put those links in the description. One especially about how to see and move notes around with octaves all over the fretboard so you can find voicings of any chord like this. So we're moving this down. We need to see really quickly, okay, that's an octave right there. And that other video has exercises for how to get that down, so check that out if you need to. But now we have another voicing of this C major 7. So this is C major 7, and it was a close position voicing, and now it's an open position voicing because not everything is not as close together as it can be. Now that's totally playable. We might be a little more familiar with it if we move this B note over here. Now that's a bit of a pinky stretch, but that's a common voicing, common shape that is an inversion of something that you will find rather familiar, I believe. So now we're just in a pickle though, because we're like, okay, cool, we got this shape. Maybe we know that inversion of C major 7, but for a lot of us, that's not super familiar looking. So I'm going to do a little workaround here, and don't get overwhelmed because the trick I'm going to show you to figure out if any voicing is a drop chord will be clean and easy after this. But here's what I'm going to do. If we know that this is the root still, and that's the 3rd, and that's the 7, and that's the 5, and we want to know the fretboard that well with our voicings, this is the 5, so I'm going to now invert this chord by moving every chord tone down the string that it's on, down to the next closest chord tone. So if this is 5, then I'm going to move it down to 3. So I'm moving that down to 3. Okay, this is 1, I'm going to move it down to the next closest chord tone, which is 7. This is 3, I'm moving it down to 1, and this is 7, so I'm moving it down to 5. Now I did that really quickly, but that's a process how you can find any inversion shape of any chord along the same string set. Great way to find and practice inversion shapes. I have a video about that as well, which I will put in the description also, so you can check those out for further practicing if you need to. Let's do it again until we see a shape that we're super familiar with. So this is the 3 of the chord. This is the 3rd, so 3, 2, 1. And if that stuff is confusing, like how do we see that quickly? My chord theory playlist that walks through kind of from beginning to easy to advanced how to see chord theory on the fretboard is something I highly recommend, and I'll put a link to that in the description as well. Okay, we're at the root here. So this is the 7, and we have to move it down. Here would be 6, here would be 5. That's the next chord tone down. This is the root, we're moving it down to 7. This is 5, we're moving it down to 3. Now, all of this I'm just doing in front of you, not saying you should do that unless you feel good about going through that process or that's what you want to practice. I just did that to get us to this shape here, which I hope that a lot of us are looking at and saying, hey, I feel like I've played that before. I know what that is. This is C major 7. This is the most common shape of C major 7. That's not an open string chord shape. Here's the root, here's 5, here's 7, here's 3. So this is a drop 2 voicing of major 7. And of course you can play it anywhere. That's on the root C, but if you play it here, then you're playing E major 7. And move it around anywhere, etc. So, okay, that's a drop 2 voicing. So I started with our close position voicing and said, okay, that's what we start with. You drop the 2, the second note from the top. I moved this over here, figured out like, okay, that is a direct inversion along these strings of this familiar, kind of very common major 7 chord shape. So now, if you want to just take all that in as introductory information of like, oh, okay, that's where it comes from, got it. And now we can see why if you're a keyboard player, that's going to make so much more sense a lot more easily, because you can just play that initial voicing and just move that shape down and see it. But we have to kind of wiggle things around so much. Here's the trick though. Take any shape, any 7th chord shape that you're playing, take the bottom note and move it up an octave, and then count from the highest note to when you count from the highest note, what number is that note that you just moved? Now, that doesn't have to be the root. It could be anything. But when you move that up and you say, okay, here's the highest note, next down is this. Oh, that's the one that moved. That's drop 2. Okay, because if you count from the highest note 1, this is next down, this is next down, this is next down, if you count down descending. So, okay, that proves to us that this is a drop 2 voicing. So if we did that with another just random voicing, if we just take this voicing and we say, okay, is this drop 2? Is it drop 3? What is it? And it could be interpreted as many things, but let's say it's a B minor 7 chord where that's the root and it's moved up here. So it's an inversion of a B minor 7 chord. Okay, well, I'm going to take the top note and move it up an octave. So again, seeing these octave, I call it octave displacement on the fretboard a lot of times. That can mean a few things, but I use that for moving notes around on the fretboard. Move that note up an octave and you can move it here or here. Either way, and then look for, so I'll move it here, and then say, okay, from the top note over here, oh yeah, 1, 2, it's just the next one over, is the second note from the highest, so this is a drop 2 voicing as well, drop 2 voicing. So that's the really practical takeaway from this, is that little trick that we can do with any voicing. So let's talk about drop 3 voicings, and it's just going to be the same process. I'm going to go ahead and go to the G root here. This is G. And then we're making a G major 7 chord just to keep working with major 7. This is the root, this is the 3rd, this is the 5th, and this is the 7. Drop 3, as I said earlier, is going to be, if you count from the top note, 1, 2, 3, what's the 3rd highest note up? Move that down an octave. We want to see our octaves super well, super clearly. Okay, then we can see it as a familiar shape, fine. We might need to move some things around. I'm going to move this note over to here, same note, that's G, and one of those 2 fretboard clarity videos I recommended already that will be in the description shows how to move the unison notes around as well, and exercises for that. Well, this is a common inversion shape of major 7, but if you don't see it clearly yet, let's do that inversion situation so we can turn it into a shape that is very common. This is the 3rd of the chord, so I'm moving it down to the root. There, this is the root, so I'm moving it down to 7. This is the 5, so I'm moving it down to 3, and this is the 7, so I'm moving it down to 5, and voila, we get the G major 7 voicing, one of the most common major 7 voicings if the root is on the 6th string. So this is a drop 3 voicing. Now I'm giving you all this kind of fretboard move around stuff and all this explanation because if you really want to know this, it helps to see that process. You don't have to memorize that process, but just to see that instead of just having someone say, yes, remember forever that this is a drop 3 voicing. Just remember that. It's good to know why. We started with that shape that was the close position. We took the third note, we moved it down an octave. That was a direct inversion shape of this voicing that we are very familiar with. Now let's do our test with this. If you take this bottom note and you move it up an octave, and then you count from the highest 1, 2, 3, 4 in that order. Okay, it's the third from the highest note, so it's a drop 3 voicing. So you can do that with any voicing you want. So if we took that minor 7 shape, this one that we kind of inverted before, and we move this note up an octave, and now we count down 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, it's the third highest note. So that's kind of cool. Now this note is B. You move it up here, and that note is B. That's an inversion of the same chord. And we figured out already that this voicing is a drop 2 voicing. So for the most part, for years and years, and still pretty much, I just kind of ignore this idea of, is it drop 2, is it drop 3, just because it's so, it's impractical on the guitar to think of it, because it's so indirect for us. We don't have this really direct relationship and association with thinking of it as these drop voicings because of how much we have to move things around to see it. But because it is such a common term, instead of just memorizing that this type of shape is a drop 2 voicing and that this type of shape is a drop 3 voicing, now you know why, and now you can take any shape that is a 7th chord and test it out by moving the bottom note up an octave and then counting, is it the second from the top or is it the third from the top that you just moved, which makes it either drop 2 or drop 3. If you're interested in playing jazz chords at all, I highly recommend downloading my free PDF booklet called Any Jazz Chord. It's just a really awesome, straightforward method on how to interpret literally any jazz chord that's out there with a few shapes that sound great. So if you're interested in that, you can download that. There's a link at the top of the description for it. I'm here every Tuesday with a new lesson. That's it for this lesson. Let me know if you liked it in the comments or hit that like button. I will be back next week with another one. Until then, happy practicing and take care.